I wanted to cover a koan this morning, classic koan, case 28 from the Mumonkan, Ryutan's name echoed long. And I also, this question comes up every now and then, especially when we have guests, what are these koans? And they simply put are records or cases of teachings and conversations throughout the centuries, often an interchange between student and teacher or master to master. Many of them are based in historical fact, as far as we know. Some of them may have been back crafted to make a particular point, but the koans are little stories, little tales, little records to help illuminate the meaning of the Dharma or the Zen teachings. Perhaps one of the most well-known one in vernacular sense is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? There are others in the beginning set of koans for Prajna Heart Zen Center and all of the Zen centers in our lineage, the Dharmakaya koans, like show me the color of the wind, how do you stop the fighting across the river? How do you stop the sound of the temple bell? And koans are designed to cut through our ordinary, rational, logical way of believing in things, seeing things, thinking of things, and communicating things. Sometimes in Western vernacular parlance, they are referred to as riddles. That's not really accurate. I mean, they may seem like that on the purpose, but a riddle is something that you riddle out and it has a solution. It's like a problem to be solved. Koans more are, what understanding do you have of what's going on? So I'll dive right into this one. Ryutan's name echoed long, and so I will read it word for word to start. The case. One day, Tokusan kept asking Ryutan for instruction till nightfall. Ryutan finally said, "The night is late, why don't you go to bed?" Tokusan thanked him, made his bows, raised the door curtain, and left. Seeing how dark the night was, he turned back and said, "It's pitch black outside." Ryutan lit a lantern and handed it to Tokusan. Just as Tokusan reached for it, Ryutan blew it out. At that, Tokusan came to sudden realization and made a deep bow. Ryutan asked, "What have you realized?" Tokusan replied, "From now on, I will not doubt the words of the old master who is renowned everywhere under the sun." The following day, Ryutan ascended the rostrum and declared, "There is a man among you whose fangs are like trees of swords and whose mouth is like a bowl of blood. Strike him and he won't turn his head. Someday he will settle on the top of an isolated peak and establish my way there." Tokusan brought his sutra commentaries and notes to the front of the hall, held up a torch, and said, "Even if you have exhausted abstruse doctrine, it is like placing a hair in vast space. Even if you have learned the vital points of all the truths in the world, it is like a drop of water thrown into a big ravine." He then burned all his commentaries and notes. After making his bows, he left. There is a lot going on in this koan, and we're not going to try to cover every bit of it. Could you grab my Zumi and his mother's picture? But there are many things that relate to our practice and more specifically to some of the things that we all have been discussing together recently. And as is often the case in the koans, there's backstory to them that is just as important as the front story. So what is going on here? To really understand this koan, we need to go back preceding the koan. Like, what event led Tokusan to Ryutan for instruction, and who were these characters? So to answer some of that, Ryutan, who is the master of the temple in this koan, lived around 850 AD. Ryutan Sushin Senji. He was the son of a rice cake maker. And as you know, often in these tales, Ryutan, when he was a young boy, delivered rice cakes to the Zen master Dogo every day, and slowly started to come under his tutelage, and then was ordained and went on to study and become a master in his own right. Tokusan, who we're talking about, lived from 782 to 865 AD. Now, here's the interesting part. Tokusan was a Buddhist sutra scholar. He thought Zen was a bunch of nonsense. He thought Zen was BS. He was contemptuous of Zen because Zen, which points directly to the mind to understand our true nature, okay, the experiential side of Zen that Kevin, we talked about this morning, and that all of us have talked about. Zen focusing on experiencing our true self rather than reading about it, okay? Experience it directly on a person by person basis ourselves, self-realization, versus studying and studying and reading and reading and studying and studying and reading and becoming the masters of the sutra. Well, here you have Tokusan, who came from a different school of Buddhism. And he essentially thought it was heresy that you could attain enlightenment, that you could attain true understanding without being a scholar. Tokusan had a nickname, Shukango-o. And Shu was his family name. So Shu, like Burrier, was his family name. Kongo means diamond, and O means master. So he had this nickname, Master of the Diamond Sutra. So here's this guy, lifetime to mastering this one particular sutra, the Diamond Sutra. Contemptuous of Zen, he's determined to go south to the center of Zen and debunk the theory. What was that television show? Mythbusters, okay? This is the 850 version of Mythbusters. I'm going to go down and debunk that nonsense. I'm going to bust that myth. And that's really where our story starts, where he is heading down to vanquish the foe. I'm going to read a little bit further here. This is Yamada Roshi commenting on the koan. While on the road to the province of Rei, Tokusan became a bit hungry and decided to get something to eat. He found a small snack shop in the area run by an old woman. So he's on the road, he gets hungry, he runs into a snack shop run by an old woman. And this is another point of close contact for our lineage coming through Maizumi Roshi, Tenshin Roshi to us. Maizumi here is a picture of Maizumi with his mother. Now I'm going to come right back into the modern world. I was in a Uber ride probably 4 months ago, 5 months ago, when we were still Ubering 5 months ago. And I was on my way up to the Self-Realization Fellowship on Mount Washington because I've been doing work with them for quite some time, working with them on how their practice presents in the world. And the Uber driver said was a woman, and she's a Japanese woman, and she said to me, you know, what is this Self-Realization Fellowship? And I explained it, and she said, well, why are you going there? And I explained that, and she said, well, are you a practitioner? And I said, no, actually, I'm a Zen practitioner. And she said, oh, Zen, really? What school, what lineage? And I said, well, it's Soto Renzai school. And, the founder of our particular branch of the lineage was Maizumi Roshi. And she said, it was very interesting what she said. She said, oh, he was a woman. And I said, no, but it goes back to this picture because Maizumi did something very different. In taking the name Maizumi, it was actually his mother's name. So he took on his mother's name, honoring her as a factor in his teaching and enlightenment. And in our practice and in our lineage, we take great care to acknowledge the women ancestors. In one of the dedications to one of the sutras, we specifically say, and to all women ancestors whose names have been lost or forgotten, because women have played a huge role throughout the history of Zen. But because of the way history is written and because of the men being men and just the times of the times, a lot of the women's names do not appear. I want to bring that up because we have a lot of very dedicated women practitioners in our Sangha and extended Sangha and in our lineage. It's important to acknowledge that. So here, once again, we have an old woman appearing in this story. Tokusan asked her for a tenjin. Now, tenjin is interesting because it's the name of a sweet snack. So Tokusan was on the road and he's hungry and he wants a snack. Tenjin also translates directly to pointing to the mind. So he's now asked this woman for a snack, but you could also say he's asked her to point to the mind. Now, she's no fool. He's asking for a snack. He's hungry. But she responds by asking him a question. Your Reverence, what are you carrying in your cart? Now, he proudly responds, they are notes and commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. I am Shu Kongo-o. Nobody can compete with me in the interpretation of its teaching. The woman says, is that so? Then I would like to ask you a question. If you can answer it, I'll treat you to a tenjin. If not, I won't even let you buy one. So here we have this woman all of a sudden appearing with that cutting sword of wisdom. Ask me whatever you like, the great scholar offered. The old woman said, I hear that it is said in that sutra, the past mind can't be caught. The present mind can't be caught. The future mind can't be caught. With what mind are you going to eat the tenjin? In other words, what mind are you going to point to? Tokusan was dumbstruck and without words. Not one of his scholarly words was of any use to him. Here we have the greatest specialist on the Diamond Sutra, and he could not answer a question concerning one of its phrases, put to him by, it says here, an old woman. How incompetent intellectual understanding can be. And we're not told whether Tenjin actually got the snack or not from this woman. So here we have a great scholar, master of the Diamond Sutra, asked a very straightforward question, with which mind will you eat the tenjin? And it's in this state of bewilderment and being completely ungrounded and having the rug pulled out from underneath him. It's in this state that Tokusan shows up at the temple to work with Ryutan. So that gives the koan a whole different context, right? Because Tokusan came to see Ryutan to debunk the direct experience of Zen and to say true understanding can only be accomplished through intellectual understanding and study of the sutras. But he's just been undone by a vendor on the road. He comes to Ryutan and they work together all evening, well into the night. And finally, Ryutan says, "It's late. Why don't you go to bed?" And this is where the case picks up. Tokusan turns, makes his bows of acknowledgement, and turns to leave and lifts the drapes and goes outside. But it's pitch black outside. He turns back and says, "It's pitch dark outside." Now think for yourself, what might this darkness represent? But then the koan takes a turn. Ryutan hands him the light, hands him the lantern. And just as Tokusan takes the lantern, he blows out the light. And as this tale is told, this is the moment at which Tokusan gets it. This is the moment where Kevin, everything drops away and he sees that all things are one. That blowing out of the light allowed this great scholar who had been undone to experience the great awakening. Now, one way of looking at this koan, of course, is that Ryutan's not blowing out the light, but he's actually blowing out the darkness and allowing the light of enlightenment to come in. And then as the koan goes on the next day, they are with the assembly, with all the monks assembled in the hall. And then there's the really kind of gruesome imagery of Ryutan saying, "There's a man among you whose fangs are like trees of swords and whose mouth is like a bowl of blood. Strike him and he won't turn his head. Someday he will settle on the top of an isolated peak and establish my way there." This is a teacher acknowledging the great advancement of a student and acknowledging that this student had come to him with great persistence and determination. And even in the face of having all of his intellectual understanding taken away and undone, is still there, gnawing at it, mashing it up, the bowl of blood as a mouth. And one day this will be one of my successors. With this kind of determination, this student will be a successor, which he was historically. Tokusan went on to become one of the great teachers in Zen. And then Tokusan brought his sutra commentaries. Remember, he's got the cart full of the Diamond Sutra and all of his commentaries and all of the teachings and everything that he's studied for his whole life. He holds up a torch and says, "Even if you have exhausted abstruse doctrine, it is like placing a hair in vast space." All of this knowledge is like a hair in vast space. Even if you have learned the vital points of all the truths in the world, it is like a drop of water thrown into a deep ravine. And then he burned it all.
Did you say I had in bass face? In
Vast.
Got it. Sorry.
Vast, sorry. Southern California slurring. So, beautiful koan about the Zen experience and about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, the difference between connection and compassion. And I think especially in our age where knowledge is as simple as a Google search. what does true wisdom and understanding look like? Where connection can look like an Instagram post or a Facebook feed. What is true compassion? And so we sit zazen so that we can have a direct experience of it. And then, of course, we have book club on Tuesday night where we're reading and discussing. And I'm reading from a book right now and throwing lots of words at it. But in the end, it's like, what experience do you have? Are you willing to persist and do the work and sit zazen and count 1 to 10, work on your koan, focus on your breath, walk slow, walk fast? Are we willing to keep at it, even when we doubt it, even when we have contempt for it? Will we keep at it? Because if we do, there's the potential for everything to disappear and for everything to appear in the original state and original beauty in which it exists. Ryutan's name echoes long. The koan is great. The tale of the old woman on the road who challenges this scholar is brilliant. It's brilliant. To me, it's the role of each of us in our practice is to always challenge what we know, what we believe, what we have opinions about. And set the torch to it and start over. We talk about great persistence, great doubt, and great faith. Great doubt is this, I'm not sure. Let me look into that. Persistence is keeping going. And faith is us working with our teachers and the teaching and the lineage. And what did he say? From now on, I will not doubt the words of the great master. The very teacher he came to debunk, he's now acknowledging. I'm here for this game. I'm all in. Here's everything I thought I knew. Burned. Show me the way. Let's walk the way. And that's the invitation for all of us. So to those newer to koan study, I hope that's not too obscure and obtuse, and I hope the commentary this morning helps explain what some of these stories are and how they work. To those of you who have worked with this koan before, or if it's a first experience, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And I say, as I say, there are many, many ways to go at this. I've just touched on a couple. There's much more in there. And to Maizumi Roshi and his mother, a deep bow of gratitude. I'm going to end there and open it up to questions, comments, thoughts that anybody may have. Over to all of you. And you have to unmute yourself.
So the book that you're reading from, like somebody like me who doesn't, have any knowledge about this Zen practice, I wouldn't probably necessarily understand what they were talking about and who those people were, right?
Right.
Okay, so this is where the so the only way I can learn that is by these teachings through you. Is that correct?
Well, there's a lot of books. You can pick up the book. You can read some of the background that I read to you. And there's so many books, Karen, you can read yourself to death. And often when people first come to the practice, they're like, what can I read? Where can I learn about this? Where do I go? And at the beginning of practice, we really encourage people to sit and count breaths and come to some understanding of who you truly are beyond words, as I said in the newsletter. And these talks we do on Sunday are hopefully pointers along the way and help us understand more. And then, yes, as I did today, who's Ryutan, who's Tokusan, you get a bit of the history, a bit of the storytelling. People have different ways at it. Tokusan went and studied and studied and studied, and then somebody had to blow out the light before he got it. Zen focuses mostly on that experience and sharing the teachings back and forth like this. Yes.
So Dan, I kind of want to, I'm curious, during both of the meditative periods, what is your mental activity?
What is my mental activity? Oh, there's a trick question. Part of it is sitting with this koan and where I'm at with this koan because I know I'm up for giving the talk, right?
Right.
So it becomes koan study for me in large part, sitting with it, clarifying my understanding, seeing where it might be weak, seeing where it might help others, and sitting with the koan. And that's when you're doing koan study as a student, that becomes your practice. You move away from counting breaths into how do I stop the sound of the temple bell? And you sit with that koan. You take that in to every pore of your body, and you just sit with temple bell, temple bell, temple bell, until it takes over and you're trying to reach understanding of that. So a good part of my sitting prior to a Dharma talk is being with whatever the talk is going to be on, to try to get as much Dan-ness out of the way so that the teachings can come through. And then honestly, if I'm really truly honest, for Lori and me managing the Zendo and the Zoom and like people coming and going and the chimes going on and off and making sure that everybody's muted, there's a certain element of just managing. But the true Zazen is for me focused on the koan. I'm also continuing my practice always with Tenshin Roshi up at Zen Mountain Center. So I'm working on different koans with him. And so to the extent I don't need to focus on today, then I can focus on my own training on that track as well. So it's koan study would be the very short answer.
So when do you move from the, or what are your clues that you move beyond just the numbers? And where do you go from there?
There is counting breaths. There is koan study is a next phase should someone go there. There's also shikantaza, which is just sitting where you've become adept enough at working with your breath, at seeing the mind, that some people's entire practice is just sitting. And that's what it's called, just sitting. Typically in our lineage, we ask students to sit, count breath, work with their breath for a year before going on to koan study, because you can really deepen your practice just through breath practice over the course of a year. And if you start koans too soon, they can become more concepts, more stories, more delusions in the parlance, and can really unground you rather than ground you in the practice. So we want everybody to have a really solid breath practice before diving into koans. And then, like I say, there are entire schools of Buddhism that don't study koans at all. They're like, just sit, zazen, zazen. And eventually you stop counting, but you're still just sitting.
So my mind has a question. My takeaway, and this is where I go, is often is like if I had a yard sale and I took all my knowledge and I offered it up, it might buy a coffee. Like,
Hmm.
So knowledge has served me, but it hasn't, but where, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
In this practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do you think, John?
It leads me to it, but it's not the thing. It's not the experience.
Yeah. Yes. And we live in a world where we need to, I guess nobody balances checkbooks anymore, but we need to at least check on our account balance, and we need to go buy things, and we need to drive cars, and we need to engage in our professions. So knowledge is a very useful tool, right? The things we know, the experiences we have, the skills we acquire. Zen is not about tossing all that away so you're just floating in a vast sea of emptiness and cannot accomplish anything. But Zen is about clarifying your relationship to that knowledge, clarifying that relationship to your mind, seeing mind as a sixth sense and not as your entire being, so that then you can use it and you can use your knowledge. There's a series of imagery called the 10 ox herding pictures, and at the beginning you're wandering through the weeds and of life and just doing the doing, and then at some point you catch a glimpse of the ox, and the ox is this direct experience of self or enlightenment. You catch a glimpse of it, and then you go on, John, and you start taming the ox, and then you're completely a master of the ox, and then you're at peace with it, and you and the ox are one, and you're riding along joyfully, freely through the countryside. At the very end of the ox herding pictures, the accomplished master comes back into the marketplace, fat and happy, off of the mountain, and strolls through life, just as the beginner strolling through the weeds, but with an experience of what is actually so, and all the knowledge and skills to be there for everyone else and to be effective and fully expressed in their life. So it's that relationship to what we know, and that relationship to our knowledge, and our relationship to wisdom, and our relationship to skills, and how we use them. The samurai warrior studying Zen to strike with the sword skillfully rather than just flailing about. Does that help? You don't have to say.
No, it helps. And where my stickiness comes in this practice is you reference Japanese names, and it's like, oh, I need to know those before I can be effective.
No.
And things like that. I just get this stickiness.
Point two. So Bob heard about this thing called Zen, and he heard Dan talking about you can experience your true self beyond all description. And Bob was like, what a bunch of hogwash. That can't possibly be true. I've studied this and I've studied that, and I've done comparative religions, and I know the difference between the Tao and the this and the that, and Confucius says this and Christ says that. I'm going to go tell Dan he's full of shit. Right? That's one way to hold these names. And then somebody along the way says, hey, Bob, what about this part of all your learning? And Bob finds that he has no way to communicate it. And so he goes deeper. I need to understand this. How do I express this fully so that others can see it? Yeah, you can throw all the Japanese names away. Okay.
I would have John
Oh.
enjoy that cup of coffee.
I love that we're revisiting the book. When I read it, sometimes when I was first reading this book, it was like reading Martian. I didn't really understand it until we'd come to book club, and I would understand a little bit. And I think when we had interview, this story kind of ties into this. I was at the DMV the other day. I said I did a little bit of this in the email to the book club, and I had my Zen book, and I got there early, and it ended up being like a 4.5 hour wait in the DMV line. It was a lot, and so like 45 minutes into it, while I'm reading this guy comes with this huge boombox of really explicit rap, and very explicit. And I was like, no, God, no, God, no. And of course, he gets like 2 people behind me, and it's just blasting and for 3 hours. And so then I'm reading my book and trying to be Zen. And then a guy working for the DMV, who was like the rice cake lady in drag, says, the line's gonna, this is at 3 hours. He's like, the line's gonna be slowing down because we're going to lunch. And I'm not gonna go into it in detail, but I pretty much lost it on him. And while I'm holding my Zen book, he and I are like going back and forth, and it ended up, him walking away and me saying something. And I looked down at this book, and I started to read again, and I just thought, what are you walking your talk? Are you using the stuff you're learning in here? Where's my practice? And I kind of felt like a fraud, like as I'm reading it, and inside it wasn't that negative, like weird thinking. It was like, really, that was such a beautiful example of where I'm at in my practice. Of course, standing in the line for the DMV for 4.5 hours can drive anyone crazy, but I just, it was just such an enlightenment. I don't know if that, I believe that's kind of the same as that story. It's like, I come with all this knowledge, but what am I bringing to my world? So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Andrea.
That's such a great story. I really want to hear the tape of what you said to the DMV guy. I can relate.
Andrea, I love that story too. But like, honestly, what I hear in that story is the fact that you had the book there and you looked down at it and you had this awareness of the way that you are operating. Like that to me, that is the practice, right? Just that awareness. And like,
Uh-oh. Did everybody freeze?
back, to be intentional. So I think it's a great story.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
I was going to say something about earlier. I'm not sure. Kevin, the lady, I don't.
Karen and Kevin.
Thank you. Okay, good. But Karen, you asked earlier about like, well, do you need to teach? Dan, are you the person who teaches stuff? And I thought, Dan, you answered that very well. But for me, it sort of spoke to something in me, because I was like, no, that's, it's not, he doesn't, Zen is so much about your own realization. So like Ryutan, did I get that name right? Ryutan blows out the candle, right? But Tokusan then has a realization on his own, not because Ryutan told him what to do, but because Tokusan had his own experience of his own enlightenment.
Yeah.
So that's like such a critical, essential thing, which I think Dan pointed to, but I also just wanted to, like, from my own experience, because the way that you asked the question was sort of like, oh, well, you need somebody else to show you the way. And that to me is very, very much the opposite of what this practice is. And so, yeah, Dan really just points the way and does a great job of it. But our own, whatever realization it is that we accomplish in this practice is our own, we got there. Nobody else is responsible for that but us. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because I felt like it was in the space for me.
Thanks, Jeff. It's a good and fine point, and it does add to that answer to Karen, because in working with students, my job is, as Jeff says, to point the way but not tell the way, right? And when somebody is coming with a question or working on a koan, if as the teacher you give too much, you actually rob the person of that experience, and you rob the person of the direct understanding. You may share some knowledge, but you have stolen the understanding. And so there's a nice little dance, student to teacher, of how much do you point and how much do you wait, and sometimes how much do you let somebody dangle. I've been left dangling for months in not knowing by my teachers. Just like, nope, ring the bell and you're out of the room. And like, nope.
Wait. No.
I think it's very like the whole thing about you can take the most creative, wonderfully illustrative writer and have them attempt to explain the experience of eating a peach, a really nice, ripe, sweet peach. And that's great. And then you can tell that to other people, but you don't own that until you ate a peach.
Yeah.
You never own it until you eat a peach, right? That's kind of what that felt like to me.
There's a beautiful koan, Kevin, called in the early collection. It's "Show me the peel of the orange you ate yesterday." That goes right to that.
Oh yeah.
So in that light, then knowledge can be thought of as pointing the way. In my knowledge points the way to this, but it's not the way.
Yeah, that's the way. Everything is the way. This is the way. In one of our chants, right? Walk the way, even if you do not know it.
You don't see it.
Even if you do not see it. So it's all the way, John. But the knowledge is not the direct experience of the true self. I could even describe it all day long, but until you actually experience, in the book we're working with now, right? Body and mind following the way. Until you experience that directly, those words, even like, what does that mean? Body and mind falling away. I mean, what does that mean? So you can know that that's what enlightenment is, but until you experience it, you don't know it. Somebody could explain sex to you and what it feels like, but until you experience it, like, what is any of that? What are those words? I'm assuming some of us have had sex somewhere.
Just you.
Really?
You're saying we should try it.
Anybody else? Philip, I know you joined from afar.
You still with us?
He's there.
Galen had his hand up too, I thought.
Who, Galen? Yeah, Galen, go for it.
Thanks.
Oops.
Crossover.
First, I want to say I think that was
Hey, Philip. I'm gonna mute you. Galen's talking right now.
My
Okay, Galen. Philip, we'll get to you next.
I just want to say I thought it was a great presentation of that koan, and it's a tremendous story. I was told this early on in my practice, and I didn't realize how much it meant until much later, but Tenshin Roshi reminded everyone over and over again that knowledge and wisdom don't make it past the shoulders a lot. We have this sense that this knowledge, this understanding, these questions all come from someplace up here. And there's an awful lot of wisdom and knowledge that each of us has that never gets even into the conscious intellectual phase. You know, the understanding of this practice, I don't think necessarily comes up here. I don't think that you're ever going to get your questions answered in your head. This is much more like practicing martial arts, or learning to play an instrument, or dance, or something like that, where the moves begin to talk to you from a different place. You know, I was really interested in the question about what do you do after the numbers, and also, you know, I was told and learned later that, you know, the Japanese say that it takes 10 years to learn how to just sit. 10 years.
Yeah.
Counting the numbers, following the breath, doing whatever you're doing until you get to the place where you can, where your body knows what's going on. And, you know, I remember wanting to hurry up. You know, I bet if I really concentrate, I could do this sooner, you know, but it really is a cumulative thing in that way, the practice, learning how to sit, changing my zatsu, figuring out how high and how low I want it to be. What does it mean to be erect for me? I don't mean that in a sexual way. I mean, you know, sitting up straight. All of those things come from just doing this practice. You know, the questions come from here. Master Dogen talks about mind body. In the East, there's always that joint thing that goes on. In Buddhism, mind means everything. It doesn't mean brain. It doesn't mean head. It doesn't mean intellect isolated. And you know, and coming from the West, that was a big thing that I had to somehow get resolved. Somehow understand that thinking is just part of it. Trying to understand is just part of it. And other than that, everything else that I've heard from you, Dan, has been splendid. I mean, you know, that's a very humble position to take in terms of the teacher. You can't do this without a teacher, and yet just when they're handing you the light, they're going to blow it out because they're not going to steal that from you. You're going to have to get that yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. And it's funny, the 10 years of practice, we live in such an accelerated world, an accelerated pace. It's funny because I'm always hesitant to say, well, perhaps go on after a year. You know, because you can just see newcomers going, oh my God, a year? You know, like I can't do this for a year because we're so accustomed to what do I get now? And I'm going to do that faster. And how do I attain that? And how do I achieve that? And how do I get to the next level? And how do I get to the next point? And where's my next piece of candy? And yet the practice is settling in and sinking down into it. And before you know it, Chalet, it's been a year. She's in there somewhere. Philip, do you want to try?
You may have really bad connection.
I don't know if your connection's good enough. We're willing to roll with you if you want to try again, Philip.
Where is Philip?
He's camping.
Oh, cool. Oh,
well, now he's gone.
Can I say something about what Galen was talking about?
Yes.
So as far as like movement and what I've experienced with that, I think that you're so right about that. From my experience in dancing and in the movement, and when you're in that state of where when I'm in ceremony and I'm dancing, it is a state of where there's really is no you're not really thinking, you're not using your mind, you're just in the movement, you're just in the sound and the rhythm of what you're doing. And at that moment, something is awakened. It's like a cellular memory that starts to move you and starts to feed you and starts to just help you connect in to where you're not even aware of what you're experiencing or what's coming through, but it's showing in the world around you as you're in ceremony. So there is something about that with the movement and the mind and the knowledge that can come through when you're doing that, when you're in that state. That was my experience. That's been my experience with it. And I still use that to this day. I use that to get into that space of non-mind, but still in connection with this in a sacred way. I don't know if anybody understands that, but I just wanted to share that. Yeah, Lori, understand.
Karen, last week we were talking on that, and it had a word attached to it, samadhi, and I was talking about involuntary versus voluntary samadhi. And one of the great promises of Zen is that you can just enter that state that you and Galen have described at will. Like you're in your life and you just go boom. You know, so it doesn't take perching yourself at the edge of a double black diamond and jumping off to enter that state of no mind. You're just through your practice and your developed skill with this at that molecular level. You can boom, go there as needed or desired. So between the two of you, beautiful description.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Brandon, we're reaching the top of the hour. I just want to, again, thank you. It's good to see you on the screen again. Anything that you want or need to say before we?
Yeah, no, I mean, nothing really coming up, I guess, to question or say about it. You know, thank you for the talk. Really enjoyed that. Yeah, nothing to say. Thank you, though.
No, it's very nice to see you. I just wanted to say hi as much as anything. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you.
So it's 11:02, everybody. We should start closing out. Lori and I are happy to leave the line open if anybody has any further questions. But why don't we do the 4 vows? Tenshin Roshi, the teacher that several of us have referenced through the day, he's doing online Dharma talks every Sunday during this time of COVID-19. That begins at 11:30. If anybody wants the link to that, there's an endless amount of Zen to be had on Sundays and every day. We have Zazen Tuesday, Thursday mornings, book club Tuesday night, evening Zazen Wednesday evening, and then of course Sundays. If you're interested in any of that, it's all in the newsletter and on the website, the links and timings. If you're interested in membership, Melissa is our director of membership. Mostly we're just glad to see everybody and ask you to come back. And let me pull the vows back up on the screen. And let's close out the morning.
Ascension be